as well. Let's try and get reaction quickly before the president takes to the podium. And we speak now to an expert on local government issues. That's Dr. Pooe, and he joins us now. Dr. Pooe, thank you very much for your time. A governance specialist that you are, your assessment of what I've just said, 151 on the brink of collapse, while 43 have already collapsed. Is this situation salvageable?
Well, thanks for having me. Yes, it is salvageable because, look, many of the problems really do go down to issues of capacity and just having proper accounting systems and processes in place. But I think for me, the bigger problem is these issues have been highlighted for the last decade. If you go back to even 2010, the Auditor General reports at the time were stating the same things. And look, we're only just actually scratching the surface, because what I think these governance problems are saying is, look, can you basically give account for what you're doing? I think for me, the bigger problem with local government is it's very under-resourced, and I think its place in South African government and politics, it's almost as though it's very undermined. So for me, until we really address those issues, where we really see local government as the real face of government and needing to be resourced, not just financially, but actually having the best human capital around, then I think we really see the full potential. So these issues for me are, while important, we don't want collapse, but I think they're actually scratching at the surface of what's wrong with local government.
We're going to come back on the issue of human capital that you speak of, because that's critical to saving these municipalities. But let's touch on what the Minister of Finance had to tell a gathering yesterday, and that is that the issue of budget cuts are some of the problems that face these municipalities, while the municipalities themselves are unable to spend these monies that are granted to them by National Treasury. And you will give us your sense as to why these municipalities, when they cannot deliver services on the ground, but they have the temerity to return monies that have been underspent.
Well, look, sometimes when the Auditor General does make certain findings, it's not always the issue of, look, someone is corrupt. It's actually sometimes the issue of that, listen, because you've not hired the right CFO who can actually account for the money, and you actually don't know how to channel it towards actual proper projects and even infrastructure within your certain municipality, you find that it's almost as though people just say, look, rather than being seen as being a bad apple, let me rather return the money. I think it's almost the proverb of talents, where because you don't know what to do with your talent, you simply think, look, if I don't do anything with it and it returns, it's a good thing. But actually, as you're correct in saying, it actually is not a good thing. But again, it goes back to, as I said, it's a human capacity issue. And so sometimes it really is about that you really have not hired the right people who know how to access these funds. Because you have to understand, you don't simply get money into an account like you and I get it. It's an issue of saying, okay, when it comes in, how do you account for it? Which projects are going to go into place? Which systems and processes do you put so that you can actually account for each and every cent spent? And I think a lot of the municipalities, especially if you go away from the metros, you go towards your local governments, especially in rural areas, that's where the problem really comes in, where people don't know how to spend the issue. So rather than, I think it's a known problem amongst those that look at local government. But what's actually missing is just a proper articulation of how to actually remedy the situation. Because we've had this problem long enough now. We should not actually be having these types of discussions. We should be asking the question, and this is why I always put forward, how do you actually reduce the scope, the number of municipalities we have, so that we can actually have something which is more manageable, so that even rural municipalities can hire the right people and actually account and use this money wisely.
Dr. Pooe, let's then tackle the issue of the lack of skills, human capital, as you put it. Where are these skills going to be found? At some point, I listened with amazement, the president telling us that there is talent, lots of it, but it just needs to be placed in the right places where their skills are going to be used to their full potential. So where is that skill going to be found? And add to that equation the hot political potato of cadre deployment, because that, in my eyes, at least, is a deterrent for those who do not necessarily come from within the political establishment, but come from outside, and they're saying, but we are trying to offer our services, but we're told, I'm not a member of the African National Congress.
Well, look, I'll start it backwards to say you're right in saying the better question is as you're framing to say, why isn't talent readily wanting to go into the local government? And look, there's a myriad of issues. One of them is, as I said, you kind of have to ignore the metros because even they also have those constraints. The better question is, are you able to get someone who's a senior engineer to go work in, let's say, Umtata or even go to Venda? You know, that's a big question, and that's where the problem comes in. So really what is missing here is the question of pipelining talent, which is to say, look, we have to all accept that, listen, people want to go towards different things. That's part of occupation. But the question is, do we have enough talent in the pipeline? Can you even entice them? You know, one of the things that I think they could really do is to say, listen, it's a given that you will not get a senior seasoned engineer to go work in a rural area in South Africa. But can you at least get them for 3 or 4 years or create some sort of system where they can at least mentor 3 to 4 other junior engineers who they can sign off as they work in that area? And surely out of those 3 or 4 junior engineers that are there, or even economists who work in LED, one will be able to stay behind. But it's a question of saying, would they then want to work in an environment where you're asked to have skill, you're asked to have capacity, but your political principles don't appreciate it? 2, they themselves are not actually skilled, because that's another thing. That it seems as though the types of politicians that actually end up in local government are not the best and the brightest. It's just simply people that are, for a lack of a better word, they're left over to their own devices. So that system needs to change. And your question where you find them, I would agree in part with the president that there is talent in this country, even if you had to look at South Africans who have left. But the question is, there is not a system in place which is able to account for the system and say, listen, let's actually entice you into the public sector, or even let's work with the private sector to create almost like a 50-50 system where we can borrow from the private sector for things we don't need. Because the political system does not allow for that. It's almost as though the politicians take precedence over skills and capacity. So there is capacity, but I think what we should be focusing on is to say, why is the political system, or why the political principles not ask the same question of being able to account for the lack of talent they have?
Let's conclude the conversation with finances. The Auditor General has spoken at length about the state of finances of these municipalities, and to say that they are in a shambles is probably an understatement. National Treasury, where do they fit into this picture? What are they doing to assist over and above what the Auditor General and her team are doing?
Well, look, I'll put it in 2 ways. The first one we have to understand is, look, we've just spoken about the lack of capacity and the ability of municipalities to look after themselves. When you're unable to do that, you're unable to collect, rates and taxes. You're unable to actually even promote proper local economic development, which is to say you're unable to make sure that business is able to do their business well, and therefore they can give you revenue. So that's one of the big problems we're having. So when we say lack of finances, it's probably a bigger question of saying there's lack of local economic development to stimulate the ability of these municipalities to generate revenue. And then secondly, there is a question, and it's one where I keep raising it, which is to say, we give more money to provincial government than to local government. I think it's over 600 billion to provincial and less than 100 billion, if I'm not mistaken. The numbers could be correct there, to local government. That for me doesn't square up. Where people meet the government is at local government level. Why do we still have provincial government taking precedent over local government? So where Treasury is supposed to come in is Treasury is actually supposed to understand the rules and, the spheres of government and where impact is most felt, which is local government. And for them, I think they really have been sleeping at the wheel to actually be able to make an argument to say, listen, we actually need to reverse how we give money towards local government. Local government, for me, is supposed to take out the majority share of our government. Because when we're able to do that, then we're able to properly hire the best and the brightest, and able to really start putting pressure on government and politicians to actually say, listen, it's not good enough for you to simply put someone who's a mayor for the lack of being a mayor. This needs to be somebody who actually understands finances, who's able to actually improve the area. So for me, that's the problem with the finances.
Dr. TK Pooe, let me thank you very much for your time. He's from the Wits School of Governance. Thanks indeed for your time.